was a school system in a large city that had a program to help kids who were in the hospital continue to keep up with their work. It wasn't easy to do. Teachers had to go into the hospitals, the children's hospital, and work with the children and help them so that they didn't get behind when they returned to school. And one day, a teacher who had never done this before was asked, could you go over to the children's hospital and help this child with nouns and adverbs? Said that he is having trouble with that. She said the other problem is that this child is very, very depressed. And they're in the hospital, they're depressed, and if you could do anything to sort of lift them up and make them feel better. When the teacher walked into the hospital room, she was taken aback. The child she saw before her was burned from head to toe and could barely see out of his eyes. And she sat down next to him and he said, what are you doing here? And she said, I'm here to help you with your nouns and your adverbs. She struggled the entire time, and she was actually happy to be leaving the room because she was so uncomfortable with the situation. Later on, one of her administrators came up to her and said, what did you do when you were in the room? What did you say? And she said, well, what are you talking about? And said, well, ever since you've been there, he's had a different attitude. All of a sudden, he's not depressed anymore. What was it that you said? And she said, I didn't say anything. She said, I was so nervous and I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. And the administrator said, well, you did something because he's different. He's happy. He's talking and he's nothing like what he was before. Well, she ended up going back several times, and finally she got up the nerve to ask, what happened? Why did you suddenly change? These were his words. They wouldn't send a teacher to work on nouns and adverbs with a dying boy, would they? He thought he was dying. He thought it was over. And here this teacher came in to work with him, and that told him that he had hope. There was a future. He had hope. Hope is something we all need, but hope is something easy to lose in the world that we live in. Well, I want us to go back to 1994. A man named Robin Mark was sitting down at the end of 1994 watching a television show on all the things that were going on in the world that year. It was a review of everything that happened in 1994. And that happened to be the year of the Rwandan genocide. And I don't know if you know what that is, but it is absolutely one of the most tragic things that has ever happened in the history of the world, in my opinion. The Rwandan genocide basically was a planned extermination of a group of people. In Rwanda, they are divided between the Tutsis and the Hutus. And they don't like each other. You can't tell them apart. There's no way for you to walk into Rwanda and know who is a Tutsi and who is a Hutu. But they know, and they actually have identity cards that show which are which. The ruling party decided to get rid of the other side, and in the process killed, in 100 days, almost 1 million Rwandans. Almost 1 million. And it was planned. They actually planned the whole thing. 1 million people estimated to have died. So Robin Mark is watching this, and he's depressed. And the first thing he thinks is, well, God must not be in control anymore. How could God be in control and allow 1 million people to die like that? And he began himself to get depressed. Just like that child in the hospital, he started thinking there is no hope. And he decided to pray about it. He said, Lord, give me something, tell me something that tells me that you are still in control. When he sat back and just listened, he said, I could almost hear God saying, I am still in control. He is a worship leader in Belfast, Ireland. Robin Mark is a worship leader in Belfast, Ireland, and he does 2 services, an early service and a later service on Sunday mornings. And in the early service, the pastor was preaching on the book of Ezekiel. Robin Mark is sitting in the service, and he's listening to this message on Ezekiel. And Ezekiel is an Old Testament prophet. And during the time of Ezekiel, Israel had lost hope. The world was crumbling around them. The Babylonian army led by King Nebuchadnezzar had laid siege to Jerusalem and destroyed it, completely flattened Jerusalem. So Jerusalem is in ruins. People are enslaved. Israel had been divided in half. One group went this way, one group went that way. They didn't have a choice. Families were separated. Things were horrible. There was no hope. They were treated like slaves. Their families ripped apart. Everything in their lives was destroyed. In their world, it was like the little boy who was burned and believed he was dying. It was like the world described in that special that Rob and Mark saw about what happened in the Rwandan genocide. No hope. It's like what we see when we look around the world and you think there is no hope. Well, Ezekiel said to the people of Israel that they needed to have hope. In Ezekiel 36:33 through 36, this is what the sovereign Lord says. On the day I cleanse you from all your sins, I will resettle your towns, and the ruins will be rebuilt. The desolate land will be cultivated instead of lying desolate in the sight of all who pass through it. They will say, this land that was laid waste has become like the Garden of Eden. The cities that were lying in ruins, desolate and destroyed, are now fortified and inhabited. Then the nations around you that remain will know that I, the Lord, have rebuilt what was destroyed and have replanted what was desolate. I, the Lord, have spoken, and I will do it. If I'd heard that in the midst of the situation I was in at that time, if I was an Israelite, I would have said, yeah, right. That is not going to happen. So what Ezekiel did next, God spoke to him and gave him an example to give them of what could happen. And he tells a story, and it is the story that is mentioned in the song Days of Elijah. It's called the Valley of the Dry Bones. The hand of the Lord was on me, and he brought me out by the Spirit of the Lord and set me in the middle of a valley. It was full of bones. He led me back and forth among them, and I saw a great many bones on the floor of the valley, bones that were very dry. He asked me, Son of man, can these bones live? I said, Sovereign Lord, you alone know. Notice, doesn't answer, yes, they can live. Then he said to me, Prophesy to these bones, and say to them, Dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. Then he said to me, Prophesy to these bones, and say to them, Dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. And this is what the sovereign Lord says to these bones. I will make breath enter you, and you will come to life. I will attach tendons to you, and make flesh come upon you, and cover you with skin. I will put breath in you, and you will come to life. Then you will know that I am the Lord. So I prophesied as I was commanded. And as I was prophesying, there was a noise, a rattling sound. And the bones came together, bone to bone. I looked, and tendons and flesh appeared on them, and skin covered them, but there was no breath in them. Then he said to me, Prophesy to the breath. Prophesy, son of man, and say to it, This is what the sovereign Lord says. Come, breath, from the four winds, and breathe into these slain, that they may live. So I prophesied as he commanded me, and breath entered them, and they came to life and stood up on their feet, a vast army. Then he said to me, Son of man, these bones are the people of Israel. They say, Our bones are dried up and our hope is gone. We are cut off. Therefore prophesy and say to them, This is what the sovereign Lord says. My people, I am going to open your graves and bring you up from them. I will bring you back to the land of Israel. Then you, my people, will know that I am the Lord when I open your graves and bring you up from them. I will put my spirit in you, and you will live, and I will settle you in your own land. Then you will know that I, the Lord, have spoken, and I have done it, declares the Lord. The images in this passage were something the Israelites could understand. They were basically a pile of dry bones, scattered far and wide. They were cut off from family, they were cut off from friends, and living in desperation. The world was a nasty place. They could identify with the idea that they were scattered everywhere. But then God says, I'm going to put flesh on those bones. I'm going to breathe new life into them. I'm going to make you new. And though it sounds strange, rattling bones and suddenly tendons appear and skin and everything, he is describing new life. New life coming from the old. He's describing what God was going to do in a way that was descriptive to the Israelites. So Robin Mark is sitting in the service and he's listening to the pastor preach this and talk about the lost hope regained. And it's amazing what God can do with the seed. He's watching the Rwandan massacre in the special at the end of the year, and it's in his mind and he's thinking about it. He's thinking, where is the hope? Then he hears the pastor preach about new hope found, new life gained in the valley of dry bones. And he went down to the kitchen between services. They had about 30 minutes between services, and he sat down with a pen and paper and started to write. And he wrote, These are the days of Ezekiel, the dry bones becoming as flesh. And in the 30 minutes between the services, he wrote the entire song, Days of Elijah. 30 minutes. Those were the first words he wrote. And guess what? They sang the song live at the end of the second service that morning. That is how quickly Rob and Mark wrote that song. So what does it mean today? It means that we are declaring a belief that even though sometimes it feels like God's not there, God's Spirit is still working. He promises us that even though we feel like a big pile of bones, all disconnected and heading off into our own directions, He is still with us. He is working in us. He is bringing us together and making us whole in Him. It is a message of hope. The entire song is a message of hope. Since we've looked at this in the order Rob and Mark wrote it, let us continue in that same order. And he says, "And these are the days of the harvest." This is a line actually from the words of Jesus in Matthew 9:35-38. Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom and healing every disease and sickness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into His harvest field." Jesus is saying we have a whole world that needs to hear that there is hope. There is hope in the valley of dry bones. We have people who need to hear about the real shepherd. They need someone in this lost world. People need hope. The fields are as white in your world, which is the next line. If you know how wheat grows, being out in the country like we are, we see wheat all the time. The wheat turns a golden color, and then just before it goes bad, it turns white. So you have an opportunity right when it turns white. You need to harvest it right away, or it goes rotten. So what Rob and Mark is saying here is we have a job to do, and we need to do it now. We need to let people know that there's hope. We need to harvest right this moment. He's saying we've got to do this before we lose our opportunity. It's our job. And we are the laborers in your vineyard declaring the word of the Lord. God is calling us. He's calling each one of us to walk out, take that step, and tell people that even though we feel like we're walking in the valley of dry bones, God can make us new. He can bring us new life. And just like that child who is sitting in a hospital thinking that they're going to die, they see that they're not because somebody was willing to reach out and touch them. Even though that person didn't realize when they were talking to them the difference they made just by being there. It's the same opportunity each of us have to reach out, to go beyond, to take a step in a direction we might not expect because God has called us out as laborers in the vineyard, declaring the word of the Lord. Hope in a world that seems like there is no hope. And that's how days of Elijah began.